something that I tend to value highly and see benefit in is studying church history. And I see value in studying all history, but church history specifically can just be a positive thing for us as brothers and sisters in Christ to learn from. Look at those who've gone before us, different places in the world, different times in history. And one of the things that you see when studying church history is that within the last couple hundred years, the church, and especially the Western church and maybe even more so evangelicalism within the Western church, has increased the emphasis on personal faith in Jesus. Now, an argument, I guess, could be made that we've swung the pendulum too far at times and often neglect the communal aspects of faith. But generally, I think it's been a positive thing for how we consider that we as individuals have and grow in faith in Jesus. And when you look at the faith journeys of individuals, it quickly becomes apparent that those journeys can be quite unique. So one person may have been staunchly opposed to God during their life, and then all of a sudden had a dramatic experience, and they were drawn toward God because of that. Another person may have been in a different religion, and then were given a dream from God that opened their eyes, and they came to faith in Jesus Christ and in Christ alone. Another person may have been raised in a family of Christ followers, and their faith maybe doesn't even have a distinguishable beginning point. Another person may have taken a journey that just includes multiple points of deep trust in Jesus intermixed with points of intense questioning. All that to say, there's just not one specific example of a faith journey that is meant to be experienced by every single person. Right? Our loving God reaches out to all of us where we are. He guides us in our lives. His presence remains with us no matter what situations we face in our lives. But while all of our faith stories are unique, there's some general categories or maybe even stages of faith that I think we can identify. And this morning, as we continue in John's Gospel, we're going to look at a specific faith journey, one of a royal official from the town of Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. And what we're going to do is, as his story is presented to us, you can see in the sermon notes, we're going to examine 5 different stages of faith, 5 different stages of belief in Jesus, trust in Jesus that we see in this man's life. And as we do that, as we look at these, here's what I would challenge us to do. Our challenge is to consider where we are at currently in our own faith journey. As we look at his and kind of see some general categories, where are we at in our journey? And along with that, to consider what might be keeping us, or what would it take for us for our faith and our trust in Jesus to either begin or to grow more deeply. Maybe move to that next stage of faith, as we'll see. Again, it's not about having a journey that exactly mirrors this royal official that we'll look at, but instead, I can overlay general principles on top of my own journey and think about where I might be currently and how God might be drawing me, calling out to me to move forward in my faith journey. And this would apply. It would apply in a general sense, kind of in a broad sense, as it applies to our faith, but it also applies to specific situations as well, as we'll see. I can have faith in Jesus that is generally growing and deepening in a broad sense, and yet there might be an area in my life that I'm kind of sequestering on its own, where faith is just barely sprouting in that area. And again, you'll kind of see as we go through this. And I'll end this morning. We'll come back to this challenge, but I wanted to give it to you now so we can kind of have that mulling around as we read this man's faith journey. So we're toward the end of chapter 4 in the book of John. I'd encourage you to turn there. It's page 889 in the Pew Bibles, if you'd like to follow there. And I'm going to start in verse 43 and follow along as we see this first stage described for us, a cultivated soil of faith, cultivated soil for faith to begin. So John chapter 4, verse 43, we read this. It says, after the 2 days, and again, that's the 2 days he spent in Samaria that we talked about last week with the woman at the well. After the 2 days, he departed for Galilee. For Jesus himself had taught that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem for the feast. For they too had gone to the feast. And then verse 46 as well. So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. So Jesus has continued on his journey. Remember, a few weeks back, he was in Jerusalem. He was conversing with, confronting even the religious leaders. He then moved north into Samaria, where we saw last week. He interacted with the woman at the well and then other Samaritans as well. Now Jesus has continued northward, and he's returned to his home region of Galilee. And in verse 44, John gives us a parenthetical statement. John is presumably remembering back to a scene that is recorded in Matthew's gospel and in Luke's gospel, where the people of Nazareth, the town in Galilee where Jesus grew up, they took offense at his teaching one Sabbath day. And they were so offended by Jesus that they intended to throw him off a cliff. You talk about not being welcomed in your own town. That was the response that Jesus found in Nazareth. And this was, chronologically would have presumably been before this. Well, now Jesus, he's traveled through Samaria. He's come back to the general region of Galilee, the region where Nazareth is. But this time, even though John kind of reminds us of how Jesus was received previously, this time he's welcomed. We see verse 45, the Galileans welcomed him. And we're told that the reason is because many people from Galilee had traveled down to Jerusalem for the Passover. That was one of the pilgrimage feasts where many, many people went to Jerusalem. So people from Galilee went, they saw Jesus, they saw the signs that he had performed. And again, back in chapter 2, verse 23, John mentioned this for us, that many believed in his name. They saw the signs that he was doing. So what we see is that those signs seem to have cultivated and prepared the soil of their hearts for them to begin to have faith in Jesus. Now, though the people were only observing Jesus' signs from a distance, they still recognized the power that Jesus displayed and seemed to have opened themselves at least to the possibility that there was something significant about Jesus. Now, at this point, their faith is probably nothing more than just a fascination with divine power, but the soil is at least being prepared, being cultivated through what they saw in Jerusalem. You might even say that the seeds of faith were being sown while they were in Jerusalem during the Passover. And then after stating this more generally, John directs our attention back to a specific town in Galilee. He says Jesus came once again to Cana. Of course, that was the scene of Jesus' first sign, his changing water into wine. And what we find out is that there was an official who lived in Capernaum. Capernaum was about 20 miles to the east, roughly to the east of Cana. And this official heard that Jesus had arrived. And the reason that the news mattered to this official was that he had a son who was ill. And so here I think we see something else which causes the soil of our hearts to be cultivated for faith. First it was the signs that Jesus was performing down in Jerusalem. Well, here, the official was faced with a situation in his life where there was a need that he could not meet. There was a problem that he could not remedy. And so, even though he had heard stories about Jesus, I would say it's probably doubtful that this man would have done anything with that knowledge had this need not arisen in his life. If his son's not ill, he's probably not taking the 20-mile trip to Cana to go see Jesus. It was really his helplessness which further cultivated the soil of his heart for faith to take root. And again, we can think about these things in our own lives. Times that we hear about how Jesus has worked in someone else's life, or maybe we've seen it firsthand, that cultivates our hearts. Needs as well. We might look at difficult situations in our own lives with disdain and frustration and maybe even anger. But in that, we ought to rightly see how God uses the sharp blade of the cultivator to break apart the hard soil of our hearts during those difficult times. God will use those to draw us toward him, again, to prepare for faith to take root and to grow. So both the proclamation of the power of Jesus and the difficulties, the needs in our own lives, are the things which lead to cultivated soil that's ready for those seeds of faith to be planted and then begin to grow, as we'll see. So that's the first stage, this cultivated heart for faith. The second stage is when faith begins to sprout. It takes root and starts to sprout. Look in verse 47. So when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." So at some point, this official possessed a sprouting faith in Jesus, and it caused him to make the decision to go see Jesus. It caused him to take that first step on that 20-mile journey from Capernaum to Cana. Now, surely there was much about Jesus that this man did not yet know. I mean, his relationship with Jesus is as thin as it could be, if you could even call it a relationship at that point. But something was poking up through that cultivated soil of his heart. Now, I would argue that the focus of his faith was probably still predominantly on himself and what he would receive from Jesus. I mean, that 20-mile journey was undertaken so that his son could be healed. And yes, he went to Jesus on behalf of his son, but I don't think we should assume he had no selfish motives in that. Right? He wanted his son to be healed. I would say he probably knew of at least one other person in Capernaum who was also ill, but he didn't go to see Jesus on their behalf. Right? He went to see Jesus on behalf of his son. He went because he wanted his own son to be healed. He thought there was a chance at least that Jesus might be able to do that. Now, I think Jesus picks up on the motives, not just of this official, but of the people in general in Galilee. When we see his response in verse 48, I think that's what he's doing. Right? He responds to the man's request, but he speaks to all those who are present. Right? The ESV gives us a note there, unless you, that's the plural you. Jesus is not just talking to this official. He's talking broadly to all who are there. right? Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. So he's stating, again, he's responding to the man, but speaking to everyone, saying you're simply looking for further signs and wonders. And if I would just prove myself to you according to your preferences, then you might begin to believe in me, begin to trust in me. And I think we ought to take note that we're not different from the people in Galilee, are we? I mean, when we first come to Jesus, what drives us to him is our desire for him to intervene in our lives. And that is an understandable response to the needs we have. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying there's connection there. We can relate with this royal official. We can relate with those in Galilee. When I first came to Jesus as a young child with budding faith, it was as the result of my desire to go to heaven and not go to hell. That was where I was as a young child, right? And then again, while that is a good desire, there's some self-centeredness in that, right? My faith in that moment was focused on a transaction, what I get in the deal. I get to be with Jesus in heaven. Again, good, wonderful thing. But it's what I get out of it. And in the decades since being a young child, I think the times in my life when I find myself more strongly driven toward Jesus are those times where I'm facing difficulty. I'm facing uncertainty of some kind. But if our relationship with Jesus is never anything more than transactional in nature, then it's probably a stretch to truly call it a relationship, right? I mean, if our interactions with our children or our friends were characterized in that way, we probably wouldn't view that as a real relationship, would we? And again, please don't hear me incorrectly. God has created us as finite beings who cannot truly be self-sufficient. He created us that way. We are created to need him. That is a good thing. And when those needs drive us toward God, they're doing what they intended to do. So I'm not trying to heap guilt or shame on any of us when we go to Jesus out of our needs. We absolutely should. But faith must grow deeper than that, right? And in Jesus' love and his mercy, he provided an opportunity for this official's faith to grow deeper than just his son being healed. Look at how he responded here. Verse 50. Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. So Jesus responds to this official. He gives him a command and he gives him a promise. Command was go, and the promise was your son will live. And in his response, he provided opportunity for the official's faith to grow, to blossom into an active faith. In the immediate context, at the moment when Jesus spoke those words, nothing appeared to have changed for the man. Right? I mean, his situation from the outside looked exactly the same. All Jesus said was, "Go, your son will live." Right? This was prior to text message. He couldn't, real quick, check in and see. He didn't know. So the only thing different in that instant that was noticeable to the man was he now had a decision to make. Would he exercise an active trust in Jesus by believing him to be trustworthy and powerful in this matter? Would he believe that the words Jesus spoke to him and trust them to be true by acting on them, by going, even without knowing exactly what would or wouldn't take place in his son's life? I mean, in essence, Jesus was asking this official to not to disregard his request, but to set it aside just for the moment and step out in faith toward Jesus, trusting him. That's what he's asking him to do, trusting him by saying, by obeying the command to go. And I think, it wouldn't be unlike that scene that Jacob read for us with Peter walking on the water, right? John gives us, in a few chapters we'll get to, where John records that story, and he only tells us about Jesus. It's Matthew that gives us the detail about Peter also walking on the water. So in that story, the disciples, they'd been rowing into the wind all night. They weren't making much headway. They needed Jesus to rescue them. They needed him to provide what they were lacking. They were stuck where they were. And so Jesus walks out to them, and when Peter recognizes Jesus, the first thing he does is he wants to go out to Jesus. He asks Jesus to call him out. Right? His eyes and consequently his desires were placed on Jesus himself. And so when Jesus said, "Come," Peter trusted Jesus by obeying that command. And there would have been that moment when Peter lifted his foot over the side of the boat, swung it over the edge, and his body weight was freely falling for however much of an instant that was before it stopped on the water, where Peter didn't exactly know what was going to happen. He didn't know. I mean, he was trusting. He stepped out, and I'm going to trust you, Jesus. Now the command to the official is different in our story. With the walking on the water, Jesus tells Peter, "Come." Here, Jesus tells the official, "Go." But it's still a call to trust him. It's a call to trust Jesus even without knowing what is exactly going to happen next. It's an opportunity for faith to grow from just being focused on our own desires to being focused on Jesus himself. And so, just like Peter got out of the boat, the official began that 20-mile journey back home. It says the man believed the word Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. So he started with a heart that was cultivated for faith. It was sprouting, and now we see that it's active. He went. He obeyed. He left that place really only having tangibly received Jesus. Now, he was promised more, but he hadn't yet received it yet. All he had in that moment was Jesus. His belief was in Jesus' words, in Jesus himself. That's an active faith, a picture of active faith here, a faith that trusts Jesus. And that trust shows itself through decisions and through actions. It shows itself through resting in Jesus. Now, an active faith, right, one that is seen trusting in Jesus, is never misplaced, because God will always work in a way which confirms our faith in him. Look at how the story continues, verse 51. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." I'm just going to stop right there for now. The words of God, the words that Jesus spoke to this man, are trustworthy and true. Now, when he left, all he had was a promise. His trust was in Jesus, and what he found was that, yes, they are true. His faith was confirmed. When we trust God, when we trust the words that he speaks, we will find that our belief is well-grounded. God's promises are never broken. In our patient trusting in God, we will see our faith grow from an active faith to a confirmed faith. And it's not that our faith ceases being active in this next stage. It continues to be active. But we have the additional blessing of seeing that faith confirmed as we continue in active faith. And that's where this official was here as he returned home. Now, as we think about this today, I think it is so important to note that when we go to Jesus, when we bring our needs to him, like this official did, the answer that we receive from Jesus is not always what we desire, right? In this situation with the official, Jesus said, "Go, your son will live." Sometimes we go to Jesus with a need, and his response to us is, "No, but I will be with you." Or it might be, "No, not now, be patient for the good that I have for you." That is an answer that we receive from Jesus at times. And in those moments, the opportunity to believe Jesus and trust in him remains, but it takes on kind of an added dimension. Maybe said more appropriately, it takes on some added depth, our faith does in those moments. Rather than Jesus asking us to trust him prior to receiving what we desire, sometimes Jesus asks us to trust him apart from receiving what we desire. Man, those moments are hard, right? I mean, they're hard. I need to share with you, this past week, Jake Knapp has been in the hospital. Kind of went in, he's been dealing with some back pain and some other things that caused him to go to the hospital. And they ran some tests, and it's discovered that he has a mass at the base of his esophagus. They've determined it's cancerous. They've said it's spread to his ribs at this point already. It's a hard diagnosis. That's a sudden, shocking diagnosis. It's been difficult to receive this week. And, Jake and Jenna and others have already run to God, asking him to bring miraculous healing in Jake's life. And I would ask that we would all join in that. We don't know what God's answer is going to be yet. We don't know. We don't know if it will result in his healing this side of heaven. We know he will be healed whenever the day comes on the other side of this life, but we don't know yet what that response will be. But for them, for all of us, we have to hold fast to Jesus. We have to continue to trust him. Will we believe? The question is, will we believe even prior to knowing what the outcome is going to be? An active faith begs us to place that trust in Jesus regardless of what the outcome is going to be there. We're blessed when God miraculously works in ways that align with our desires. That is such a blessing. We must also recognize that our faith can and does grow so deeply when the only thing that we receive from Jesus is Jesus himself, not the thing that we ask for. And again, we don't know what's going to happen here, but in the story in John 4, this is not a formula for how to get what we want from Jesus. If we just go through these steps, then that's not what this is. It is a description of how belief and trust in Jesus grows. This is one example of a faith journey of a man where he was led closer to Jesus than he was before. Again, our journeys are different, right? Our faith journeys are unique to us, but God's still working. He's still calling us to himself. That he still gives us those opportunities to use the picture of Peter again, to step out of that boat and trust him, whatever may happen. In this journey of faith, it's not meant to be one that comes to a conclusion. It's not a journey with an end point. This is meant to be a cycle in which the journey continues, moving us and moving others as well closer toward Jesus. Look with me at the final part of the chapter here, halfway through verse 53. He himself believed, and all his household. And this was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So this official's faith was confirmed, and then he bore witness to it. Became a witnessing faith. And he did so in such a way that I think it increased his own belief in Jesus. You know, as we bear witness to Jesus and as we proclaim his goodness and his power and his trustworthiness, we continue this cycle in our own lives. Remember, this journey of faith describes not just our lives broadly, but can describe specific situations in our lives as well. So when I bear witness and remind myself of Jesus' faithfulness during those 8 months that I was off the job, I cultivate my heart for faith to grow when later I'm faced with a tough medical diagnosis, right? Or when I bear witness and I remind myself of Jesus' faithfulness when my best friend moved away, I'm cultivating my heart for faith to grow when anxiety next comes knocking on my door. I mean, we see how this works. We proclaim God's goodness in our own lives, and we're, even in that, preparing ourselves, cultivating our own hearts for what may come later. I want to read to you some of the words in Psalm 71, where this is exactly what is happening. Psalm 71, starting in verse 19. Your righteousness, O God, reaches the high heavens. You who have done great things, O God, who is like you? I mean, do we hear it there? The witnessing, the proclaiming of who God is. And then look what comes next. You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. From the depths of the earth, you will bring me up again. You will increase my greatness and comfort me again. The psalmist is looking back on what God has done so that he might cultivate his heart to keep it from becoming hard. His witnessing faith is laying the groundwork for that cycle to continue the next time that he finds himself in the depths of the earth. We are a people with short memories, and not just because of whatever our age might be, right? We are just a people with short memories. We must make it our habit to remind ourselves of what God has done in the past. And then beyond ourselves, right, so that benefits us, as we've talked about, but our witnessing faith also helps to prepare the soil of the hearts of those that are around us. So when I proclaim God's goodness, when I witness to what he's done, yes, I'm cultivating my own heart, but I'm cultivating the hearts of others as well. Right? The official first went to Jesus, only maybe even ever considered going to Jesus in the first place because someone proclaimed Jesus to him. Right? Someone told him, oh man, I saw or I heard that Jesus did this down in Jerusalem. Someone shared with him their experience of the power and goodness of Jesus, and that was why he then went. And this is part of why we gather together as a church, to do this for one another. This is also a major reason that we have a time once a month during our worship service to share personal mission moments. We need to have a witnessing faith in front of one another. I need to hear you proclaiming God's power and goodness and faithfulness so that the soil in my own heart is cultivated for faith to continue to take root and sprout and grow in my own life. We need to be doing that for one another. And probably all of us here today are blessed to have multiple people in our lives that are cultivating our hearts in this way. It really is such a blessing. Many of us probably have dozens of people who are doing that. But you think about our lives. For someone in our lives, someone that we know, we might be the only person working to plow, cultivate in their heart. We might be the only one proclaiming God's power and goodness and faithfulness to them. So may our faith be that witnessing faith that proclaims Jesus, that does that cultivating. Again, may we be people who do that not only for our own benefit, it is for our benefit, but in order to prepare the hearts of others as well. As we saw this official did with his household. His household believed because of what he bore witness to and proclaimed. And John says right at the end, this is the second sign of Jesus. It's the second public sign meant to prepare the ground by revealing who Jesus is. And remember, John has stated his purpose in writing this gospel. It comes at the very end, but we've talked about it a few times already. John says, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So even John himself is in that stage of witnessing faith, where he's proclaiming who Jesus is and what he's done so that his readers' hearts might be cultivated. And so again, going back to that opening challenge question that I gave, in a broad sense, where are you, where am I on this faith journey that we see displayed in the royal official? Are you just now hearing about Jesus being the Messiah, the Son of God? Or are you just now recognizing a need for a Savior? Are you walking toward Jesus, maybe still uncertain, but hopeful at least that Jesus can meet the needs in your life? Are you deciding how to respond to Jesus' invitation to come believe in me? Have you taken that step of faith, actively trusting Jesus' words about himself? Are you seeing Jesus fulfill his promises? Right? Confirming his words in your life. Are you bearing witness to yourself and to others so that future growth of faith might take place? Where are we on this faith journey? I think it's a question that John wants us to ask ourselves. And then the follow-up question along with that is, might God be prompting me to take that next step of faith? Might he be drawing us ever closer to himself through a growing faith? And what might that look like then in my life? What's God calling me into? It's kind of interesting. I think a person can look at the official in this story and ask the question, well, when did he first become a believer in Jesus? Because you look at verse 53, it says that he believed after it was confirmed that his son was healed at the very hour Jesus said he would be. And then you look back at verse 50, and it says that he believed when he heard the words of Jesus, and he went on his way back to Capernaum. And I would argue he must have believed something in verse 47 when he made the decision to first go to see Jesus. The reality is, this story does not seek to answer the question of when the official first believed. It's not what is at the center of this. Instead, it seeks to give witness to a growing faith in one man's life. It seeks to prompt us to have growing faith in our lives as well. So yes, that, not trying to downplay the moment of conversion, the moment of first belief, but it is about more than that. It's about the journey that comes following that as well. I think sometimes we can give intense focus to a person's conversion story, right? That first moment. We can concentrate on that moment when they receive salvation from God. And again, there's importance to considering that, but can I suggest that perhaps we should broaden our focus and place importance on that journey as well, the journey of faith that we are all on. I think about, as a married man, I can tell you the story about my wedding day, and that was an important event, one I would happily tell you. But it won't really tell you anything about my marriage if I tell you about my wedding day, will it? I mean, if anything, very little. To do that, I got to bear witness to my relationship with Megan and how it has changed and grown and deepened over nearly 18 years now. And I would say, the day that you and I became part of the bride of Christ, that's an important day. I'm not trying to downplay that. It's a story that we should happily tell. But being part of the bride of Christ is about so much more than just that single event. It's about a marriage relationship with our bridegroom. And as we proclaim that and bear witness to that, man, we ourselves and others come to understand more and more of who Jesus is and how he's working, how he's calling us to himself. So today's story with the official, it rightly prompts us to look at our relationship with Jesus and consider the current stage of it. Again, it's not going to look exactly like this official, but this gives us some good categories maybe to think through. This prompts us to consider how and where God is calling us closer to himself, deeper into relationship with him. So I hope we will all take the opportunity to do that, to allow this story to guide us, prompt our thinking, our reflection in that way. Would you stand together with me? We're going to pray, come to God in prayer this morning, and I want to be sure to pray for Jake, for the Knapp family as we walk with them on this journey. Father, we're here before you this morning, and we are as in need of you as we ever are, but maybe we recognize it just a bit more this morning. So we come to you now. We come to you as the one who has power to heal, the might to eradicate illness. And we ask that you would. God, that is our desire. We bring our brother to you. We ask that you would work that miracle in his life. And God, at the same time, we also ask that you would grow and deepen our faith, that we would trust you whatever you are calling us to, whatever the response is. We're thankful that the hope that we have is that healing comes regardless. Healing is promised. It's just a matter of when. We would like to see that healing. Even though it's only temporary healing in this life, we'd like to see it sooner. But God, we know that there's permanent healing that comes. And so would you grow our faith? I pray that for Jake, for Jenna, their kids, for their family. God, wrap your arms around them in an incredibly powerful way. God, may we, as a church body, make sure that we are witnessing to who you are. We are proclaiming your goodness and your trustworthiness and your love. We'd be proclaiming that for Jake's sake, for his family's sake. We'd be proclaiming that for our sake as well. God, we trust you. At the end of the day, you are God and we are not. Help our faith to be growing. Help our relationship with you to be deepening. God, may our desire be for you. As we come now in a time of worship through singing, again, may we proclaim your goodness. May these words not just be lyrics that we sing, but be overflowing from a witnessing faith where we are speaking your truth and power and goodness to one another, cultivating our own hearts, cultivating the hearts of others. God, we ask this morning in your name. Amen.